This past week during the octave of Easter, I had the chance to watch the new biopic of Napoleon Bonaparte. And like that, the new Ridley Scott movie starring Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon. And I am not endorsing the movie. Like, it's definitely not for kids, but it was fascinating. Right? I'd never really learned much about the French Revolution or Napoleon. Like here in the United States, we're a bit more infatuated with our own revolution. So we skipped the one that in the grand scheme of things was actually a bit more important, especially in terms of world history. Anyway, I went down this French Revolution rabbit hole this past week, and as I continued to learn about it, and then also as I just reflected on the movie about Napoleon, again, one of those great figures, we compare him to Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar. But as I reflected on it, especially in the light of Easter and what we're celebrating, and again, this huge influence on the world, all that stuff. But at the end, I was left with this profound sadness because it's weird. But at the end of the day, again, whether you want to argue that the revolution was successful or not, whether you want to argue that Napoleon was a great man or not, at the end of the day, Napoleon failed. And I don't mean that he was exiled and stuff. That's not what I mean. He failed because his life, the great desire in his life, it was too small. At the height of it all, yeah, sure, he was the most powerful man in the world, but he failed because he didn't desire enough. He wanted the whole world, but that's not enough. As I was, again, reflecting on it, that line from Jesus just kept coming back to me. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, but forfeit his life? And we do this over and over. Again, all the revolutions that ensued, again, we can argue about how effective or ineffective they were, how good or bad, all that stuff, but they were always too little. And I don't mean that they should have been more extreme or violent. No. What I mean is that people never wanted enough. They wanted some peace or justice or equality, taxation with representation. Okay, fine. But that's never enough. Why? Because it never addresses the problem. And that's the problem that I was talking about last Easter. The problem that we're all going to die. Life still ends. That's the problem. And so in that sense, only one revolution has ever succeeded. Only one. And that's the revolution begun by Jesus Christ's paschal mysteries, life, death, and resurrection. Right? Every other revolution, if you take a step back, yeah, they did some things in the world, made it better, made it worse. Again, you can argue about that. But ultimately, they left us in the same position. They just moved the pieces around, so to speak. But nothing really changed. Because at the end of the day, we are still left with that problem we'll never be able to fix, which is death. So only the resurrection of Jesus Christ, only the revolution begun by him succeeds. Today we're beginning our Easter series, and we're going to call it The Day the Revolution Began, because this is what Jesus does. If I were to ask you, though, describe Catholicism, describe Christianity, many, if not most people would say, well, God saves me from my sins so that I can go to heaven when I die. Okay. But as I like to point out, well then, wouldn't it be better for me to baptize all the cute little babies and then immediately kill them? Again, think about it. If baptism washes away sin and at that moment you're perfectly free from sin, well then if the goal is to go to heaven, wouldn't it be better if we just kill you right then and there so you can go straight to heaven? And if you have a look of horror on your face right now, great. It's good. That's how weird this is. I'm not advocating this. This is weird and messed up. But again, we can easily think, well, we just need to free from sin, go to heaven when we die. But our faith has to be something more than that. It's got to be more than just free from sin, go to heaven when we die. There must be something else. Something else must be going on. And that's what Jesus does, right? What Jesus begins through his passion, death, resurrection, and ascension, what we call the paschal mystery. It's not just this magic way to get to heaven once we die. No, Jesus begins a revolution. Something new begins. Some new door is open to us. Like I said on Easter, Jesus' resurrection is the first new thing to ever happen in history. He doesn't just come back from the dead, he conquers death. This is a revolutionary fact. This is why our faith exists. This is why our life has a new horizon, a new purpose. This is the day the revolution began. So how does a revolution then work? It's simple. The first thing is that you need this vision of reality. Think again of the ideas that led to the American Revolution. Government by, with, and for the people. No taxation without representation. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Great. French Revolution had a lot of the same. So that's the first thing, this vision of reality. The second thing you need is a dynamic leader. America had Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton. France, people like Napoleon, then all these other French dudes that I don't know how their names are pronounced. The jumping off point then is the third thing. You need something to kick this all off. America, right? We had the Boston Tea Party. France, they had the storming of the Bastille. So that's the first three things. But then the fourth thing, and this is where it really is make or break, is a commitment to it, a loyalty, a fierce loyalty to this new revolution that's begun. Like, you have to choose a side, and then you got to stick with it. So this is what I mean when I say the resurrection is the beginning, right? It's the day the revolution began. It's not that we need to be super violent. Like, no. I mean, Jesus was renowned for his nonviolence. Put your sword back in its scabbard, right? Okay. But look, what does Jesus do? First, he presents that new vision of reality. We call it the gospel. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. Turn the other cheek. Last shall be first. Render unto Caesar. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Again, all those go down the whole list. Jesus gives us this new vision of reality. We also need a dynamic leader, so that's Jesus. Duh. But then there's also the apostles. Okay, that authority of the apostles is continued to be handed on through the church. Third thing, we need a jumping off point. And that's what we're celebrating these days, the Paschal mystery. Is life, death, resurrection, and soon is ascension. It's the beginning of this revolution. Everything's changed. Everything's now different. Okay, but then the question remains, how are we going to secure victory? And the answer is that commitment, is that loyalty. In Christian language, you call that faith. That's what our readings today are really getting at. It is faith and a commitment to this new vision of reality, to Jesus Christ, to his church. Our faith is a revolutionary action. It's here in the world. It's not just a superstitious reciting of prayers, trying to get us to heaven. No, faith is now the path to victory. But victory over what? Okay, France had the monarchy. America, we had Old Blighty. We had Great Britain. But what about us? Who are we fighting? Who are we contending with? Who are we revolting against? St. John, in our second reading, he's getting at precisely that. St. John wrote, the victory that conquers the world is our faith. So the path to victory is faith. Faith is going to conquer, but who or what is it going to conquer? The world. And so St. Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, he talks about it this way. He says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the cosmic powers at work in this dark world. St. John just says the world. You remember back at Advent, we were talking about how we fight this battle on three different fronts. We fight it against the devil, against the flesh, and then against the world, right? So the world is a powerful enemy. Scripture, when it talks about the world, sometimes it refers to the globe, sometimes it refers to humanity, for God so loved the world, things like that. But the third way it uses the world, that term, it's referring to this system of ideas and values and morals and ways of operating, social norms, right? All those sorts of things, which have become skewed by the deceits of the enemy, by the desires of the flesh, by everything. And so they lead us nowhere, and they lead us nowhere really fast. That's what the world is. It's contending against us. You remember that story of the man? I love to tell it. It's the story of the man from China. I'm not going to tell it right now. Don't worry. But it's how in China, this Catholic man is captured by the communists. He's tortured for his faith, and he's willing to die for his faith. But when he eventually comes to the United States, to this country, he becomes so busy that he doesn't even go to Mass. So again, what torture, what the threat of martyrdom, what communist China literally could not beat out of this man, his faith, our culture, the world, was able to do. And it didn't even have to try. Okay, that's the power of the world. It's not neutral. The world seeks to destroy us. The world's at option one I was talking about last week. The world tells us that death, well, it's just a fact of life. Get over it. Eat and drink. Tomorrow, we die. You do you. Enjoy life while you can. Again, it's just a fact of life. Don't worry about it. But that's not just a don't worry about it. That's a very particular vision of the world. Right? The world isn't like the baseline and normal, and then we can add on Jesus things. No. The world, option one, that is a particular way of seeing the world that is completely different than the gospel. It is completely different than seeing things with the eyes of faith. That leads you to live your life in a way completely antithetical to the gospel. And like I shared last week, the results of that are that more and more people drift away as they drift away from God. There's more deaths of despair. People just live their life living towards a dead end. They begin to numb out with substances, with screens, you name it. And like this hopelessness abounds. So the revolution that Jesus begins is against that. The Boston Tea Party, that was the definitive act that started that whole thing. Storming of the Bastille, that started that thing. But Jesus' death and resurrection, that's the definitive act that says that is no longer the only option. The world isn't the only way. Death is no longer the end. Eat, drink, tomorrow we die. Don't have to do that. Right? We have a new opening, a new way to move forward. And the path to overcome that, the world, is our faith. The victory, St. John says, that conquers the world is our faith. Faith in Jesus Christ, faith in his resurrection, joining this revolution. So that's the last question then, which is, well, what does it look like? It's got to be something concrete. The Americans, they took up pens. They drafted a new constitution. They fought a bloody war. France, they did something very similar. What about us? Like, what's our concrete thing? What do we do? Because like I mentioned last Sunday, most people are choosing option one, but they'll call it option two. They'll live option one, but then also say, well, but I have faith in Jesus. Most people will say that. They believe in God. They believe in Jesus. They believe he rose from the dead. Good people. But nothing changes. In other words, our faith, it can remain very ethereal. It can be very non-concrete if anything doesn't change. We got to change something. Again, it's one thing to say, I believe in Jesus, but then do we just keep living option one, the faith, placing our faith only in the world? Faith demands that concrete response. Again, just think of the revolution. What if, after the Boston Tea Party, everyone just said, well, I'll just keep paying taxes to Britain, though? What if the British soldiers came and everyone was just like, oh yeah, sorry about that. We'll clean it up. We'll pay for it. Don't worry. What if Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Total Dependence on Britain? Then nothing would have happened. Exactly. Like, that's the point. Nothing would have happened. So no, they had to stop paying taxes. They had to fight the soldiers. They had to declare independence. It's the same for us. And from the beginning, the people began to live their faith in Jesus Christ and his resurrection in very real and very concrete ways. Like, go back to that second reading from St. John. He said, like, the love of God is this, that we keep his commandments. So faith concretely lived out, following God's commandments, that's one thing. And I could preach about that right now. I could talk about that for a long time, but we're going to keep it more simple. Because the most fundamental thing, the most fundamental revolutionary way of living, this new revolution that had begun, it was their unity. The unity and the communion that existed among them. Go back to our first reading. I don't know if you were paying attention. So this passage happens right after Pentecost. Okay, so right after Pentecost. So this is right after Peter has preached that sermon. 5,000 people are baptized. And then we're told this. The community of believers, again, these people, these 5,000 people, the community of believers was of one heart and mind. That's incredible. Like, there's like 150 of us here today, and that's hard for us to be of one heart and mind. Like 5,000, holy smokes. So there's something revolutionary going on. Same mind, same heart. But how does it continue? They said this, and no one claimed that any of his possessions was his own. Like, this was so radical. Their unity was so real. They combined bank accounts. That's nuts. So that's a radical, that's a revolutionary unity that existed among them. But the most basic and fundamental thing that happened from the beginning is that these people began to gather on the first day of the week. The fundamental gesture of this unity since the beginning, people gathered on Sunday. We hear that in today's gospel, but we hear it all throughout the New Testament. Sunday became the day of revolution. And we're going to talk about that more in the coming weeks, just what that looks like, what that means. But the point is this, the day the revolution began changed everything, but it was just that. It was the beginning. To place our faith in the resurrection means to enact the faith in real concrete gestures. Revolutions, they don't happen in our minds, right? They happen in real life. We can't keep saying we're going to choose option two, but then keep living option one. Like, no, you got to pick, got to choose. So what if this is the year when we take that seriously? What if this year Sunday becomes more than just a day we go to church? Although that's good, do that, please, thanks. But what if it becomes the day we totally reclaim for the Lord? And we don't have to change the world, but we can be victorious over it. How? By our faith lived out in real concrete ways. And what if Sunday became just that, a day totally reclaimed for the Lord? Perhaps that could be a path to victory. Perhaps that's a victory worth fighting for.